Welcome to my review of Streets of Rage 3 for the Sega Genesis. This is one of those games that has a lot of polarizing opinions, so I thought I would give mine because I've completed all the games and I was around during the time when these games all came out. So, I think I have a pretty good view on these games that'll be pretty useful. But yeah, this game, it starts out, you have a nice selection of characters you can pick from 4 different characters, which all play quite differently, so it's a real nice variety. For me personally, I really ended up liking Zan. When I beat the game on normal, that's the character I ended up using. I thought he had great crowd control skills and moves. He has a great back move that takes guys out from behind. He just has a lot of reach. I mean, all the characters do have similar move types like, back attacks and special moves and things like that, but they're all a little bit different. So Zan for me was perfect because of his crowd control ability. It's just great in his reach. And he has a really good combo with his long reach where he can do a few regular punches and then finish off the punch combo with a nice electric punch you see me doing there. So I would recommend first-time players that want to beat the game to start off with Zan. I actually got that recommendation from Anthropants, which is basically, he's an expert runner of the Streets of Rage games, speed runner, no deaths, all that kind of shit on the hardest difficulties. So I got some feedback from him before I played, and the main thing that I got from him was that Zan would be a good starting character. So I recommend checking out his channel as well. But the game has nice variety, and you can unlock more playable characters as the game progresses. You'll unlock more characters, over time just from playing. You have to meet certain requirements. I think you have to beat the characters in actual combat or something like that to unlock them. It's something along those lines. But you have your 4 base characters to start out with. And I would say that this Streets of Rage 3 plays better than any of the other Streets of Rage games and most of the beat-em-ups of the time period. And the reason I say that is because one thing about Streets of Rage 3 is that they really increased the mobility of the characters and gave you the ability to do these running dash attacks as you see me doing. And that alone really just improves the mobility and playability of crowd control, and it makes it feel so much better to play. So from that perspective, I think this game is far superior to any of the Streets of Rage games. That's one aspect where it really excels. Now, the problem is that, excelling in one aspect is not enough to make it, the best game in the series, you know what I mean? But that is one very strong point of this game. So, I mean, that, the environments are actually, there's some really nice set-piece environments like this construction site with the barrels coming down and you got the wind and papers blowing around. Very cool, atmospheric, nice vibe to it. And you got a nice variety of stages, but this one, Streets of Rage 3, does have more generic-looking environments, in my opinion, than Streets of Rage 1 and 2. So overall, I found the environments, they weren't as exciting to play in, but there are a few standout moments like the construction site. You have your typical elevator-type fights where you have to throw guys off an elevator. You don't really have to throw them off the elevator, but why wouldn't you, But, there's a nice variety of different scenarios throughout the entire game. So yeah, the music is actually the music is very strange, kind of an experimental type of music, and I would say that's a step down, and that does play into the atmosphere of the game. So that's definitely a few steps down from the original games had much better music. But I will say that after playing this for a while, the music did grow on me after a while. I mean, not to the extent of the originals, but it wasn't as bad as I had initially thought. Where I thought it just sounded kind of like noise, But it actually kind of grew on me. The whole game grew on me after a while. Whereas initially I wasn't really getting into it, but the game is overly difficult when you first play it. That's one of the things that is notable about the American version of this game is that it's extremely difficult, especially compared to the Streets of Rage 1 and 2. It's incredibly huge difficulty increase from those games. So it is jarring if you're used to the previous games. You're going to have to really play a lot better to beat this game. So initially it threw me off because I was trying to work on this game on 2 players. And 2 players is way harder than single player because you have to try to avoid hitting each other, and that means you don't have the full screen real estate to work with, and you really need that. If you're going to play on 2 players, you better be real coordinated in this game with both players. Otherwise, you're just going to get in each other's way and get each other killed. That's what happened with me. Now, when I went and played the game solo, I was able to complete the game on my 6th full attempt, exhausting all lives. And I did some save state practice on the bosses to learn them, so it did take some hours to beat. Didn't take me as long as I thought it was going to take me to beat. But one thing about this game is that it just drags on for way too long. Encounters just take too long. Bosses take too many hits. I found the game to be like, everything feels like an endurance in this game. And it just makes it less enjoyable as a result. So you got bosses like this, you have to defeat not just one boss, but you have to defeat 3 bosses, one at a time. And it's very tedious because each one takes a lot of hits to take down. And they're very quick and difficult to hit because they're always trying to disappear and throw shit at you. It just becomes a very tedious slog with some of these fights. So, I found that the boss fights really weren't too enjoyable. They dragged on for too long, and much of the scenes, would drag on for way too long. You'll be in one area fighting the same guys for way longer than you would in Streets of Rage 1 and 2. It really drags on for a long time. I think the full game might be over an hour and 20 minutes, if I remember right. But, I did list how long the game took me to complete in my tutorial version of this game, which I will link in the description. That has more details about my playthrough and how I practiced the game and all of that. But here I just chopped up the levels to show, various scenes. Now, a little later in the game, you'll see how dense, there's some good examples of how dense the game can get and how difficult. The enemies do not take turns and really wait to attack you. They will attack you at any time. So you got to be completely aggressive and be ready to take on enemies from all sides. It'll really get your crowd control skills, refined. It makes it very, very hard. If you want to play a much more enjoyable version of this game, play the Japanese version or play one of the hacks online, which lets you use special characters that you can't otherwise use. Those are a lot more enjoyable for a fun playthrough because, that makes the game feel like it should have felt. You know what I mean? Like the encounters are shorter. The only problem with the Japanese version of Streets of Rage 3 is that it's actually a little bit too easy, But it's still more enjoyable overall than this. This one's a lot more satisfying to beat because of how difficult it is, but it's one of those really hard games, you know what I mean? It's one of the hardest beat-em-ups I completed for sure. It's not as difficult as I thought it would be overall as a game. I thought it was going to be even, more difficult for me to complete, but I did end up getting through it quicker than I thought, but it was still very, very hard. So you can see there's really a lot that you have to manage. And what I like about the game, what I really ended up appreciating about the game is that they don't just give you extra mobility options, but they really force you to use all your moves and mobility options. It's not like it's just there for show. You're really going to need those moves to manage everything. So I thought that was really cool. And I started to appreciate the game, and it actually grew on me a lot. Over time, the game really started to grow on me. It wasn't like Streets of Rage 1 and 2 where, I instantly fucking love those games. But with this, I kind of felt like it was a little generic when I first played it. I didn't like the music. I wasn't feeling the game. Everything kind of felt a little bit overdrawn out. It seemed overly aggressive to me. My initial impressions were that it really wasn't that enjoyable, and I really didn't like it nearly as much. I thought of it almost as kind of a bad installment in the series. But I don't feel that way anymore, but I can say that it's not a game that instantly grew on me. So it's one of those slow burn kind of games. If you take the time and put the time into it, I think you'll really grow to enjoy it if you like the other games in the series. But just expect that it's going to be way more difficult than those games. It takes it up, many notches. For whatever reason, they decided to make normal, similar to like an extreme mode or something like that. And I think that was because of the rental industry. That's the theory that I heard, that, for game rentals, they wanted games to be much harder so people would keep renting them, Or maybe it was that they wanted people not to be able to beat the games on a rental, and then they would end up buying the game full price, One or the other. I think it probably had something to do with that. Because the Japanese version plays, it's a lot more forgiving. But this game is mostly very fair, but it's the problem is that it's really drawn out. I mean, some of the encounters just take way too long. You have way too many waves of enemies in a single area before the screen even scrolls, so it just draws everything out. I don't know that the enemies themselves actually take more hits or anything like that, but you're fighting so many more enemies. And I think there's just a lot more enemies on screen attacking you. They're much more aggressive, that's for sure. And that alone makes the game much more difficult. But I'm not sure what all the difficulty differences are. I can just tell you that playing this on the US version on normal is way harder than the Japanese version, which I beat the Japanese version the first time I played it, I believe. So, maybe start with that one. Try the hacks. Actually, that's what I did first. I played through the Japanese version, and I played some hacks of the game that let me use special characters just to get a feel for the general layout of the game. And then from that point, I started making... I did some save and load state practice on the bosses, and then I started doing full attempts on the game. So I kind of just took it slow and gradually worked my way up to beating the game on normal. This is one of those games that's kind of bullshit. If you play it on easy, the game ends early, which is really... I don't know, just a waste of your time. I mean, because easy could be a good way to practice the game, but instead they just made it something that prematurely ends, which I never liked when games did that, but it was a common thing back in this period. So I'm showing some of the later areas now because I wanted to show, how aggressive the game can get, but it pretty much stays aggressive throughout the entire game. Some parts are much harder than others, but I thought this was a good showcase of all the crowd control that you have to do, especially later on. But yeah, the game stays intense throughout. You really have to be on top of the game. But yeah, what initially was a game that I really didn't like that much. I mean, I still thought it was pretty good, but it was like I had a lot of bad impressions of the game initially. Just kind of, I felt like almost like it was a cash-in. It felt kind of generic to me. Like the backgrounds were kind of sterile. I just wasn't impressed with the game. I felt like they recycled a lot of the sprites. They probably didn't, but a lot of the sprites looked the same to me. It didn't really feel like a sequel to me initially. But I have changed some of those views the more I've played it, It has, really grown on me. I do think there's still some things that hold it back from being up to the level of the other games, though. From a gameplay perspective, in some ways I like it better than the other games because it really forced me to get on top of my skill and really master crowd control, which the other games never forced me to do that on normal. But the other games are definitely more limited in that even on the harder settings, you have to play them differently than you might a more modern beat 'em up because you don't have any running attacks. So you really have to just be positioned right, and you have to have your positioning down, which is another skill for sure. I mean, this one gives you all the tools to manage the crowds reasonably. It's just that they throw a ton of shit at you, and they're going to push that to the limit, which is cool. I like that. I like that it's something different. If you want a more extreme challenge, you can try to beat this one. So I don't have a problem with that. And it's not the challenge that bothered me about this game, because I love a challenge. I just think it could have been implemented better, with difficulty levels that are more gradual, or not even that. They could have made the game really hard on normal, which is fine, because a lot of games do that, Some of my favorite games are much harder on normal, like, Ninja Gaiden Black and games like that. But my problem was really the way that it increases difficulty to me wasn't always well done. Like, I don't like the fact that there's this way too many waves of enemies in each area. I think they should have, made it move at a more steady clip just to keep it more, entertaining and not just the same repetitive thing again and again. Because the gameplay is great, I can't say that makes it a bad game because it's all great gameplay, and crowd control and everything. But it's a lot of the same enemies that are just used, that you'll have, many, many waves before the screen even scrolls. And the whole game is like that. It just feels too drawn out. So for me, that is a negative on the game. But like I said, I did end up really liking the game. But it just took a while to grow on me. So yeah, this elevator gets pretty wild before the late portion of the game. This is not actually the very end, but it's far. And then at this point, you're going to fight many waves of enemies, and you think you're on the final boss if you don't know the game. And, after you defeat a bunch of waves of enemies, it goes on for a while. Then you'll get to fight this boss. The bosses are a mixed bag. I mean, the bosses are like, some of them are very well done, and some of them are there's a few that are very simple. There's a few that are like just regular enemies, kind of like human-sized characters like you, but they just stay on the ground and they're not hard. Like Shiva is the first boss, and that's a very easy boss. You also fight Axel, which is one of your playable characters, which is a weird choice for a boss. Now, I think if you're playing as a different character, you might not fight Axel. If you're playing as Axel, you may fight somebody else. I'm not sure. I don't remember, but... Because I mainly just worked on the game as Zan, so I don't really remember. This stage is irritating. I didn't like this stage too much. It's kind of generic looking, and what you have to do is destroy these computers, and then you have to go through these mazes of doors before a timer runs out. And if the timer runs out, you'll die from gas inhalation. So, it's irritating. I don't really like timed mechanics a lot of times in games, and I don't like mazes, so this is kind of a bad mix. Though it's not a complex maze or anything. Once you know where to go, you can memorize it, and it's not that hard to remember, but... Initially, it is annoying when you don't know what's going on. And then it ends with a very annoying boss fight, the most annoying boss fight in the game, which is these flying guys. And you don't only have one of them to deal with, but you got a lot of them at once. So it is very irritating because they're very hard to hit, and you can't do a lot of damage on them because, they fly away. But once you get rid of them, you can at least deal with the single flyer by himself. But... it's just a very irritating fight. I think eventually the minions will go away if I remember right, if you kill enough of them. But I remember this fight being very irritating. This is probably my least favorite fight in the game, most annoying fight. Because even when I practiced the game a lot, it was hard for me to do consistently well on this fight. Sometimes I would lose a lot of lives on this motherfucker. I'd get here and just drain a bunch of fucking lives. I just feel like it's kind of a cheap boss. But most of the bosses are fairly well designed. I mean, I probably enjoyed the boss fights better in the other Streets of Rage games because, like I said, these boss fights tend to be more drawn out than they should be most of the time. Like the 3 samurais that you have to fight one at a time that take really long to beat. I think they all have several health bars each. So it's a very long and tedious fight. It's very hard to hit them, and you can end up taking a lot of damage throughout the course of the fight because it just drags on for so fucking long. You're bound to make some mistakes. But some of that for me is kind of bad game design. I'm not really a fan of that shit. There is cool things like you can land from a throw. If somebody throws you and you're holding up, I believe you'll land from it. I don't think that was in the other games. There's some cool things they added in this game, like there's recoveries from throws. There's, like 2 different jump attacks. I think there was only one in the other game. There's back fist type move you can hit behind you. You got your special moves. There's 2 types of special moves, at least for each character. I mean, there's a lot in this game. A lot of moves. Which works great for the game because, you really have a lot of ways to manage your enemies. There are some annoyances in stages like this where there's these traps that you can walk on and they string you up and do damage to you. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. I find it kind of irritating, but... And then this is the final boss. I edited this way down, but first you fight this lever. It's not really a very good boss fight. I mean, you just wait around for it to come down, hit it. I mean, it looks cool, but it's really not that fun. Execution-wise, it's not really a fun fight. The final boss is kind of cool looking, fighting like a mech guy, but the thing is, it's very easy to exploit and get it into a loop, which is what I ended up doing. Now, it can break out of the loop, which is annoying when it does, but you can get it into a very predictable loop. If you time it right, you can just get it into an indefinite loop, which I'll show some of that here, when I get it right. But yeah, I mean, it's just not a very well-designed boss fight when you can do shit like that. It's kind of easy to exploit. And if you don't fight it like this, it just feels incredibly cheap, incredibly hard to hit. It's just a very irritating boss fight. So I thought it was kind of a shitty boss fight, gameplay-wise. Didn't really like that. But, yeah, I edited that, but you get the idea. It goes on for a while, because, like I said, the bosses have, lots of life bars. And, yeah, the game can drag on a little bit too much at points. Now, it did grow on me over time. I really came to appreciate and enjoy the game. Really liked it a lot, but... Overall, I would give this game a 7.5 out of 10, and I would say it's good, but it's not great. You know what I mean? It falls short of that greatness, so I'd probably give it a 7.5. I would give it the same score in the past as I would currently because, beat-em-ups haven't really evolved that much in current day. 2D beat-em-ups are still much the same. some of my favorites these days are Mother Russia Bleeds and Double Dragon Advance on the Game Boy Advance. Those are probably two of my current favorite beat 'em up, 2D beat 'em ups. So I would say, this game is definitely third place out of the 3 Streets of Rage games in the series. Thanks for watching.